Hi guys! So I am really out of practice with making videos and I have a couple of ideas in my head for things that I want to talk to you about on camera. The first thing I think I want to talk about is something that I haven't actually touched on for a while on the channel, and that is imposter syndrome. And I actually had a viewer comment on a previous video and ask if I wouldn't mind talking about this again and talking about how I feel like it's kind of going for me in terms of imposter syndrome, like how I'm feeling about it now, from where I am in my life now. Because this is something that I made a video about kind of just before I moved to Edinburgh. I'll link that video below if I remember to. And I was kind of saying that I was aware that imposter syndrome might be something that I would struggle with when I returned to university, because it's something that I struggled with before, particularly in the university context, in kind of the schooling, learning kind of context. And to be honest, I think maybe it's that because I have been aware of imposter syndrome as a thing, and aware of the tendency for myself to feel it, and also aware of the fact that most other people do experience this, and particularly within academia, I think it's particularly rife within the kind of stuff that we do, because it's a strange kind of field, it's a strange kind of thing. The thing about doing a PhD as well is that you get surprisingly little feedback as you go along. I mean, you get feedback from your supervisor, but you don't get a lot of pats on the back as you go through your PhD process as well. So it's this kind of weird, lonely journey that you undergo with sort of feedback really only from one or two people. And you're kind of stumbling your way through it and not really getting that kind of reassurance that maybe some of us would be used to, that, you know, we're doing the job and doing it very well. So I think it's particularly rife. So for all of those reasons, because I was kind of aware going into it, I think I haven't actually experienced it as badly as I was expecting to. And that is surprising, because I have been entering into a field of academia that I have never studied in before. I was really very, very new to religious studies this time last year. It was basically my first foray into the field. I had done my own reading, obviously, on spirituality, but religious studies as a field is very different to just knowing things about religion in general. And I think more than imposter syndrome, I just struggled at the very beginning with feeling like I was going to fail to do as well as I hoped I would in that field, just because I didn't actually have that background. But I never really got the sense of feeling like I shouldn't actually be there, or that I had no right to be there, or no right to be doing this degree or passing this degree. It was more a fear that I wouldn't do well enough to get into a PhD program, that I wouldn't do well enough to get a scholarship and that kind of thing. And in the end it all kind of worked out okay in some ways, not so well in other ways, but not because of my academic performance. Maybe more than anything though, I've just been lucky enough that I actually performed extremely well throughout my masters, and that maybe prevented me from having to grapple with these feelings so much as I was expecting in this degree, because within the space of a couple of weeks it was clear that I was getting very good grades, and it went from getting very good grades to getting really excellent grades that I wasn't expecting at all, and then to finishing with my dissertation and getting an unprecedentedly excellent grade. So I think maybe I have less to bring to the table from my experience because of that. On the other hand, I suppose you could say that maybe I was only able to perform as well as I did and get those grades because I didn't succumb to imposter syndrome as much as I was expecting to, because I was conscious of it going in, because I kept reminding myself that just because I felt like I was behind on reading and on knowing all the kind of background stuff about religious studies didn't mean that I didn't have things to bring to the table. I kept reminding myself that actually I was probably at least as passionate about matters of religion and spirituality as everybody else on my course or in my, of my peers, if not more. passionate, because actually a lot of them, or most of them, don't have a religious practice or a spiritual practice. I find that the more religious people in my school tend to be the theologians and the biblical studies students. The religious studies students, to a large extent, are atheists and agnostics who really don't seem to have much of a spiritual practice themselves. Either that or they're being very, very, very quiet about it. I know a couple of people who do, but to a large extent they don't. So actually I am maybe in the minority in that I have come to religious studies from an emic perspective, or an insider perspective, of actually being a practitioner myself and being motivated to study it academically, just because that's how I like to study things that I'm personally interested in, as opposed to coming to it absolutely from as an outsider. I mean, I think anyone who studies religious studies surely has, you know, an unusual interest in religion, so there must be some motivation there. But I still kept reminding myself that whatever I lacked in experience in this particular academic field, I would more than make up for in passion and in background knowledge about a particular type of spirituality and a particular kind of religion, which is paganism. And that really stood to me, and it really helped me, I think, to hold on to the reasons why I came here in the first place, and to keep returning to what I knew, to keep returning to I never tried to reinvent the wheel. Every time I had an assignment to do, an essay to write, I wasn't kind of thinking, well, maybe I should try and be more religious studies about this and branch out of just doing paganism, or paganism isn't really a real religion, so maybe I should be bringing other kinds of religions. No, I didn't think any of that stuff. I thought, no, well, I'm here because I'm interested in these kinds of spiritualities. I'm interested in why people are interested in them, why people practice them, why I'm drawn to them, in what way are they analogous to other kinds of religions, and so on and so forth. So I kept coming back to paganism as an example. I kept coming back to the online community and the phenomenon of all of us here expressing our own experiences, expressing our own spiritualities, and how we talk about that and how that works. I kept coming back to that again and again as an example, as a case study, because that's what I'm interested in, because that's at the end of the day, I'm really just bolstering my own personal interest in life, in spirituality, with an academic perspective, an academic background. I'm just finding new tools by which to observe and interact and engage with all of this stuff. And I think that really stood to me. So I'm telling you all of this not just as some sort of narcissistic ramble about my own experience, but just to kind of really emphasize how much that, for me anyway, avoiding imposter syndrome, the best way for me to avoid imposter syndrome was to play up to my own strengths, to remember why I'm here, to remember what it is that I'm passionate about, and to remember that all counts for something, and that I don't need to be the same as everybody else. I don't have to fit into some sort of cookie cutter. I can just do my own thing, and at the end of the day, if I couldn't do my own thing and follow up my own interests, then I wouldn't want to be here in the first place. Now, don't get me wrong, I still definitely have days where I feel more imposter syndrome than others. I still have days where I feel like, well, what am I doing here? I don't have any background reading, and if anything, the lack of kind of background knowledge and years of reading in religious studies has impeded me from being able to branch out by myself as much as I want to, and I'm finding at the moment, starting my PhD, that I'm floundering a little bit with finding my footing and knowing how it is that I want to approach my area of interest, how it is I'm going to be really authentic to what it is that I want to do. Because the Masters was one thing. The Masters, I was being directed in my reading, we were being directed, by the module, by the courses that we were taking, and I was happy enough to be constrained to a certain degree because, it was a taught Masters and we were kind of being carried along to a certain extent. Now that I'm in the PhD program, I am starting to feel a little bit of imposter syndrome from a couple of different angles, maybe a little bit more than I did in the last year. Purely because I'm still trying to find my angle. I'm still trying to figure out how I can be completely authentic to why I came here in the first place, to what my interests really are. I'm still trying to peel back the layers and figure out why I'm doing the research that I'm doing. Who is it for? Who is it supposed to help? What is it supposed to produce? What am I supposed to be What do I want to be getting out of it, or giving other people out of it? And that's a little bit tricky, because a lot of my answers at the end of the day come back to this community and people who, like-minded people like myself, who are interested in these things. And at the end of the day, when you're doing academic research, it's not really directly for those people. You have to look at your academic audience, and that's been a little bit tricky for me. So I've maybe been feeling a little bit imposter syndrome in that regard from both sides, that I have been struggling. I don't want to end up feeling like an imposter in this community. I don't want to feel like a spiritual tourist. I don't want to feel like somebody who is just using my prior knowledge and my access to this community, my knowledge of this community, in a way that isn't authentic, or that isn't in line with my own spiritual values, and that maybe takes advantage of that in some way. And then at the same time, I want to do research that is academically viable, and I don't want to feel like I'm just kind of prancing around in academia with no real reason for being here, that I'm just sort of satisfying some sort of personal itch, I suppose, that I have, just some sort of personal spiritual interest, without actually managing to frame it properly within the field. So I guess that's just how it always is when you enter a new thing, with a new project, with a whole new arena. There are going to be new problems and new feelings of imposter syndrome. But I discovered a couple of months ago, when a friend of mine who's already been through his PhD, I was struggling with having not received the kind of scholarship that I was hoping for, was struggling to decide what I was going to do, and he took me for coffee one day, sat me down and basically talked me into doing the PhD anyway. I ended up getting my scholarship getting raised a little bit anyway, which made my decision a bit easier, but he kind of pretty much told me, well, I've been doing religious studies since my A-levels, and I feel imposter syndrome too. Like, I feel like I haven't read anything. He's like, you don't really ever get there. You don't ever really feel like you have the perfect background knowledge, and everyone struggles with that in their own way. And that kind of did actually make me feel a lot better as well, because I would be looking up to him as somebody who had an immense amount of background knowledge and reading and experience in religious studies, and he's there saying that he doesn't feel like he does. So I thought that was really interesting too. So I think that's kind of all I wanted to say about imposter syndrome in terms of my academic career, in terms of the Masters and the PhD. But I actually thought it would segue in an interesting way into talking a really tiny bit maybe about my sexuality, because I was thinking about doing a video back on, what was it? I think it's like Bi-Awareness Day or something. I don't know, I completely missed this day. That happened a month ago now, I think. It's quite a while ago now that I completely missed it. And I was like, well, maybe I should make a video about that, because maybe this should be a video all in and of itself, but I feel like I'm just going to shove it in here at the end of this video, just as a kind of an aside. And if you guys would like me to talk about this a little bit more at some point, I will. I just feel like it's not necessarily totally integrated with the subject matter of my channel. But I will say that, I mean, you guys know that I didn't actually really ever come out as being bisexual on this channel until I suddenly said, oh hey, I've got a girlfriend. And that wasn't because I didn't know that I was bisexual or anything. I've known that I'm bisexual. I mean, it's been pretty obvious since I don't know, forever. I can't remember a time now looking back when I don't have memories that I can look at and be like, yes, well, I felt that way because I was bi. I first maybe became aware of it when I was in my mid to late teens, but it was never a label that I adopted. I struggled with labeling my sexuality for a very long time, basically from the point at which I kind of realised that bisexuality was actually a thing. That it wasn't just me being confused, because I basically, what happened was, in the very beginning when I first started to have feelings about girls, I didn't even know that bisexuality was a thing, and I thought to myself, well, I like boys, so therefore the fact that I seem to like girls must be false, so I'm not gay because I like boys. So once I actually learned at some point that bisexuality was actually a thing, it was possible, it wasn't just me, that there were other people out there having this experience too, I guess I started a long and tricky relationship with the label and with that concept and with accepting it about myself. And I've had the reason that it took me so long to actually really own that label was because of imposter syndrome, weirdly enough. I felt like a bisexual imposter. And I think it was just because as a teenager and in my early adulthood, I was constantly cycling through huge crushes and being madly in love with all of these guys, like one after the other after the other. Most of them were unreciprocated. Most of the time they fell flat on their face. You know, it was just, I was one of those sort of desperately romantic teenagers who just always had set their sights on somebody, and it was usually tragic. And girls just didn't make it into my storyline. Despite the fact that I was attracted to several girls during that time, and despite the fact that I'm looking back at it now, I would say that, I had very serious feelings for one or two, that just didn't make it into my narrative somehow. And I think it was because I played it down because of the numbers thing. I kind of told myself that it was just an anomaly, and that while I maybe wasn't completely straight, I never really liked to say that I was completely straight. I was always like, well, I'm mostly straight. I very quickly adopted the concept of like sexuality being a spectrum. That was fine. But if I was pressed into using a label, I shied away from calling myself bisexual because I felt like people would press me on it. I felt like people would be like, well, have you been with a girl? And I would be like, well, I kissed a few girls like when I was a teenager and that's about it. And I felt like that wasn't enough. I felt like an imposter. And that actually, I would say that was actually quite damaging, and it kind of, I feel like it didn't do me too much harm at the end of the day, because I didn't necessarily miss out on any relationships with any women, because I just never actually really met anybody with whom I could have had a relationship anyway in that time. And I think if I had met a girl with whom I might have been in a relationship sooner, I don't think I would have rejected that because of that experience that I had. I think maybe I was so slow to completely accept that part of myself because I wasn't really confronted with it in a serious way. All of the girls that I was particularly interested in up until my mid-20s were straight, so I was never really confronted with even the possibility. And so it wasn't until I was about 25, maybe a little younger, that I started to actually, because I remember here on the channel at one point in a video, it slipped out. I said that I was heterosexual. It just kind of slipped out, and as soon as I said the word, I'll try and find the video for you, because do you know what it is? It's my video on gender binaries in paganism or something, about the masculine and the feminine in paganism. And it just kind of slipped out, and as soon as I said it, I was like, I can't believe I've just outed myself as being straight. Because I normally wouldn't say that. I normally wouldn't say that I was straight or heterosexual. I would dance around the topic. And I kind of immediately recanted it and said, well, I don't like to use labels. But it was around that time, it was pretty soon after that, and maybe it was more and more that it became obvious in conversations with people that I wasn't willing to call myself straight. That I started to kind of more and more embrace the possibility that I was just bi, and that that I didn't have to prove that to anybody, that I didn't have to have been in love with as many women as I was men just to be bisexual, that I didn't have to do anything or show anything to anyone except for myself in order to accept that about myself. Like, nobody else needed to give me permission to be bisexual. And I think by the time I came here to Edinburgh, I was pretty open about being bi. I still hadn't come out to my parents, but I didn't feel like I was in the closet either. I didn't feel like I was hiding it from anybody. I just felt like it wasn't necessarily people's, it wasn't something people needed to know, because it just seemed like something quite private, because I wasn't in a relationship with a woman or with anybody at that time. I felt like who I was or wasn't attracted to wasn't necessarily people's business. So my friends all knew that I was bi. Like, after a certain amount of time, it would just come up in conversation, and I would happily say, well, I'm bi, and that was fine. But it was kind of, I wonder now if the fact that I have actually ended up in my first relationship with a woman, and it's very serious now. We've been together 6 months, and it already just feels very comfortable, very, very right. It has from the very beginning. felt very comfortable and very right. And I think the level to which it did click so quickly, and how the fact that we are so comfortable with each other and the relationship is so strong, that we love each other so much, I think kind of immediately dispelled any uncertainties I may or may not have had about my sexuality. But I wonder if it only became possible for me to even end up in that relationship because I was moving to a new city where I knew nobody, and suddenly I didn't have anybody looking at me expecting me to be straight anymore. I was whatever I presented myself as to people, and that was hugely liberating. And so I didn't have to prove myself anymore to people, I suppose. I no longer felt like people would be saying, oh, you're not really bi, you know, because they didn't know me. They would have nothing to base that on, if you know what I mean, except for what I told them. So yeah, that's been my experience with imposter syndrome this year, I suppose. I feel like I've released a lot of it, actually. I feel like I've come to grips with it a lot better. I know it when I see it now. I've managed to avoid it with my academic career to a large extent, and that has probably helped me to excel. And also I feel like I've finally shaken it off in terms of my sexuality as well, which has been huge and has ended up with me being in a happier relationship than I have ever been in my life so far, and that is all just wonderful. So that's me on imposter syndrome in 2016, I guess. If you guys have any more questions about that, and then do feel free to ask. And if you do want me to talk about bisexuality, my sexuality, my experience growing up, and anything like that, if you have any questions about that, do ask. If people are curious enough, if you feel like there's stuff that might be relevant to sexuality or relevant to anything that might be of interest to you guys, then do let me know. But like I say, it's something that I haven't talked about before in the channel much, because it just feels like it's a little bit kind of on the periphery of what's actually relevant. It's very personal, it's not necessarily relevant to my spirituality and so on. So I'll leave it there, and I'll probably continue and make another video soon after this, so stay tuned.